Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that encourages good discussion in our community on today's local and global issues. Now, your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, author, professor, and nationally known sports economist, Dr. Kevin Quinn.
Hi, I'm Tom Kunkel, president of St. Norbert College, sitting in for the charming Kevin Quinn. Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College. Our special guest today is futurist, economist, and author Rebecca Ryan. We'll discuss her new book and how your community can attract and retain top talent. Rebecca, welcome to St. Norbert College.
Tom, so far you're doing a great job.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I need a lot of affirmation.
Okay.
I should say welcome back to Green Bay. You had an early start here.
I did. I was born at Ballin Hospital, so I don't remember it, but it's on the birth certificate.
They still talk about that. It was a big day at Ballin. So. Well, welcome back. I know that was only about 20 years ago. So.
Very nice of you to say. I turned 41 this year.
Well, you are based in Madison now, but you do a lot of traveling around the country, and you're currently talking about, in fact, today we're noting the publication, in a sense, of your latest book, which is called ReGENERATION, and the subtitle calls it A Manifesto for America's Next Leaders. Yeah. So what kind of manifesto are you talking about?
Yeah, the reason I wrote this book is that for years and years, for almost 15 years, I was helping cities and companies attract and retain young talent. That was my shtick, that's what I did. And when the recession occurred in 2008, I saw those young professionals being handed the keys to the car, in a way, being given leadership positions at the very moment that there was a blizzard happening. And what I felt like needed to happen was that they needed a guidebook for how to get through this period of time so that they could lead effectively. So I tell some people that this book is like a love letter to the next generation to say, don't freak out, we've been here before, we can do this, and here are the big things that I think we need to try to manage.
Well, we're going to talk about regeneration in just a minute, but while you're on this subject, I mean, this emerging generation, young professionals, what are they looking for in a community when they're deciding, is this where I want to live and work? Yep.
So what's really interesting, we've been tracking this for, again, now over 17 years. What do they value most? And even in the midst of the recession, the number one thing that was attracting them to a community was not a job. It was whether they could afford to live there. So what that tells me is that, number one, they're being subsidized, and 60% of all 20-somethings do receive some sort of subsidy from their parents. You see it here at St. Norbert. But the other thing is that for them, there is more to life than work. And I think that's the big shift for communities, is to realize that when you invest in parks, when you allow your restaurants to offer al fresco dining, fresh air, on-street dining, you are doing economic development because you're showing that you are invested in community development, and that is what attracts and keeps that next generation.
And you talked earlier at the presentation you made at the college about the importance of the community embracing all constituencies.
That's right.
Young people want to live in a place where they're valued, and the people they value are valued as well, if you will.
That's right.
Well, back to your book, Regeneration. You say in there, it's in many ways, it's a very useful and compact history of America. But you say in there that American history has been divided into fairly regular and repeating seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. What do you mean by seasons, in the history of a nation?
Yeah, so I appreciate that question. The concept of America going through these cycles is not new to me. Two guys, Strauss and Howe, wrote a book called The Fourth Turning in 1997, and it's a terrific book, and it captures this idea. My twist on this book, on their research, was that these are really very seasonal. They talk about the first turning, the second turning, the third. They must be economists also. And I just said, well, let's think about these things seasonally. So in America, for example, our most recent spring was just after World War II, when our economy just took off like a rocket. And part of that was because the rest of the developed world was in a shambles post-World War II. We had incredible advantages because we weren't bombed like the Europeans were. But the middle middle class just soared. So that was spring, followed by summer, you know, when the baby boomers were coming of age and starting these very important youth movements. Then fall, when we started to see institutions like marriage, you know, divorce rates going up. So the institution of marriage getting under some pressure. The S&L crisis, you know, and so we started some things that we trusted in for a long time started to show signs of age. That's what happens in fall. Things start to decay. And then winter, things start to feel really frozen. And, you know, we're sitting here on, in mid-October with our Congress once again frozen in a deadlock. This is absolutely symptomatic of what happens in wintertime eras in America.
Well, you say in the book that we've had 3 winters before in our history, the American Revolution, the Civil War, the Great Depression, that these, you know, the cycle of the seasons takes roughly 80 years, you know, from beginning to end, and that we are now in the fourth winter, which you sort of, you start, basically you say 9/11 as sort of the demarcators. Couldn't you talk a little bit about, you know, the period that we are in, and, you know, if the theory holds, when you would start to see, you know, a bit of a thaw.
Hope. Right, exactly.
Yeah,
when will spring be
exactly.
here? It's so terrific to talk about this book with audiences from the upper Midwest, you know, and places that actually do experience 4 seasons. Like in our audience today, we had that woman from Costa Rica who's like, we don't have 4 seasons in Costa Rica, we have 2. So I think those of us who live in Packer country, you know, we really understand these 4 seasons in a very real way. But so what happens in winter, what has happened in every previous winter, is there's usually some sort of a spark that sets off a chain reaction of what I call yuck, you know, a chain reaction of yuck. And in the most recent winter, it was the 2 planes hitting the World Trade Center. I mean, that was jarring for our country. It was sort of that JFK moment, you know, for so many of us. But then what happened were these dominoes just started to fall. So the next domino was in 2002, the bull market sort of skid to a halt and Wall Street freaked out. So they invented a whole bunch of new products that led to the 2008, you know, and then the unemployment and just further into a recession. And so I estimate, well, if this winter is like the other 3 that you mentioned, we should start seeing signs of spring around 2020.
And what are the things that we would look for? I mean, as the nation emerges from winter into economic spring, what kinds of things typify that transition?
Yeah, one of the things that America has done in all of its previous winters is it questions who is America for. So the American Revolution, that was the patriots versus the loyalists. You know, the loyalists said, well, America's for Britain, and the patriots were like, oh no, it's not. It's for free-thinking men and women who want to be ruled by law. And then during Civil War and Reconstruction, our former African slaves, do they get a part of the rights and responsibilities? And then during the Great Depression, you know, it was like, well, are we going to protect our farmers? Are we going to protect middle Americans who have gotten, you know, hosed by what's happened with securities laws and so forth? So we always question who we're for, and we're starting to see some of that, right?
So if the current winter started with 9/11, that obviously was a horrific event, but it was an external manufacturer. It literally was a surprise attack. Under your construct, had that not happened, God, we wish it hadn't, do you feel like there would have been something that would have promulgated, would have pushed us into winter because, you know, the elemental forces were pushing us there, and this was just the trigger, if you will?
Yeah, I do think that because, you know, one of the things I've been sort of reflecting about is the Obama administration. I think even independent of 9/11, President Obama being elected would have been another very it has been a very polarizing issue. And that might have been the thing that just created this frozenness, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party just being locked in. So I do think that the wheels of these cycles, occur. And no one has ever mentioned that before about the externality of 9/11, but I do think we would have run into this wintertime period regardless. It would have been something else,
You alluded to this earlier, but as we're having this conversation, we're just a couple days away from a prospective default of the American debt, which is just an astounding and absurd thing to contemplate. Do you Americans are so fond of telling the rest of the world, how we're the greatest nation on earth. And yet we're at a moment where the rest of the world is looking at us like we're crazy.
We're being made fun of, yeah.
So, are we at a moment where, the division and dysfunction in Washington is something, can anything be done about it? I mean, we've had division and dysfunction in Washington before, obviously, maybe most pronounced in the Civil War. Will we get past, will this too pass, I guess? It's another way to ask my question.
Yeah, the thing I'm wondering about with this, yes, I believe it will. And the thing that I'm wondering about is if we will actually see a viable independent candidate or a slate of viable independent candidates who will sort of recapture the middle. Esquire just came out. I know it's you subscribe to it, but Esquire just came out with, their big cover story is about the middle 51% of the population that does not identify as Democratic and does not identify as Republican. And from my experience surveying young professionals, that's most of them. They think both of these parties are kind of off their rockers. And there have to be more nuanced ways to talk about, yes, I am in favor of strict immigration policy, and I think gays should have the right to marry. Right now there's nobody representing that middle 51% who's talking about that. So I do think that there is a way out and through it, and I think we're going to start to see a new generation of pragmatic politicians who will find that middle way. And in fact, about President Obama, one of the things is I feel like he would have been an even more effective president because he really is pragmatic. I mean, he's willing to take good ideas from both sides, I believe, as an independent, and find a way to have good ideas, solutions work. But he was elected at the wrong time. But we will see more pragmatics like Obama and like some of the more moderate Republicans, the Mitch Daniels of the world, lead in a political way.
On this subject, so we're in a political realm. Let me ask it's another economic question, but with a political tinge. You write in the book that it was in large part because of massive public investment.
That's right.
That investment in the railroads after the Civil War that allowed the next boom, investment in armaments in the case of World War II, that got us out of the winter of the the Great Depression. Obviously, we're doing a lot of public investment today, but are we? And yet, so many people who feel like the government's all wrong feel like we're spending too much.
Yeah.
Who's right? Are we doing the right thing? Can we spend our way out of this? Are we spending but not spending it in the right direction?
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I have an uncanny ability to honk off people on all sides of issues. So I would say that the albatross hanging around America's neck right now is Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So these entitlements, as boomers, who've always been the golf ball in the hose of society. As boomers continue to age, 1,100 of them are turning 65 every day. If we do nothing by 2050, those three programs, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, will take up all of the federal budget. We will have no money to give to colleges and universities, no money to fund K-12 education, no money to fund prisons, no money. So the albatross around our necks is really to right-size some of those programs, and I'm happy to talk about how we could do that. But to get to your question, I think we should have invested more in infrastructure in the early part of the recession because America has always been a very optimistic society, but so many people have now been unemployed for so long that they have lost faith.
Yeah.
And that is it's a social tax and it's an economic tax. If people really feel like they can't make a difference, they can't get a job, they can't make a living wage, they check out of our democracy, and we need people to really be checked in.
Yeah. So the philosopher Santayana famously said that the people who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Yeah. And I kept thinking about that, reading you talk about these cycles of history. And so my question is, we know what happened, and yet, here we are. So are we just, is it a question that we're not being intelligent enough and we're not being proactive enough based on our history? Or are these things, you know, are we just part of a world where the global dynamics are just so big and so out of our hands that these cycles are going to happen no matter what we might try to do to stop them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the seasons that I talk about are bigger than just a business cycle. I mean, we seem to make peace with business cycles, you know, like, sometimes the market's up, sometimes the market's down. This is just a different way of thinking about the cyclical nature of America, you know, spring, summer, fall, winter. So I do think that there are forces that are bigger than us that determine these things. The one thing I would say, and you know, sometimes people read the book and they say, it was so hopeful. And the truth is, when I finished this book, I was devastated. I'm a pretty optimistic person, but I feel very afraid for my country. And the reason is because every previous winter, America has emerged as a country that works better for more people. So after the American Revolution, you know, we had all these rights and freedoms and responsibilities. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, we had 3 new constitutional amendments. It was not perfect. Reconstruction was kind of a buzzkill. I mean, it didn't fulfill all the promise that it was intended to promise, but still, we got major policy accomplished. And then after the Great Depression, we had, you know, FDR's sort of, you know, phases of protecting farmers, protecting consumers, protecting deposits, you know, through FDIC insurance and so forth. So it really was like the country worked better for more Americans as the result of that. And I do feel concerned that if we don't address the right things and get the right conversations happening, you know, we've been on a 30-year trajectory where the middle class is shrinking.
Right.
There are some issues at play here which could fundamentally change who America works for. And that, to me, is the big million-dollar question.
Well, and you mentioned earlier in your presentation that, you know, if you combine the sense that more people are feeling left behind with the incredible technology that's at hand and the ability to communicate, incite, that we could literally see a kind of class warfare in our future if we don't address some of these things.
I mean, I think in some ways what's playing out right now with the Democrats and the Republicans kind of is, you know, some class warfare, because we have younger Americans who are more Latino, they are more African American, who they have very clear feelings about what the American promise is. And for example, Mayor Julian Castro in San Antonio, he may be the president someday, but he has figured out how to tap into those political instincts, which frankly are conservative from a faith basis, but are very populist from a social perspective. And so he's kind of figured out how to put those forces together in the right way. But I do wonder if we've kind of let things get to a certain place where have we passed the point of return, you know?
So we mentioned earlier that you were here for a presentation. You talked to the business community about the notion of how do you recruit talent, and then how do you keep talent, whether it's for businesses or government or for a nonprofit institution like St. Norbert College. So what are the keys to bringing in talented young people from outside?
Yeah, well, from a very meta perspective, the key is to see your community as the next generation sees it. You know, I think all of us, as we get further and further away from being a 20 or a 30 something, we have these moments where it's hard for us to see it as they do. So the best thing to do is hang out with those kids, you know, or see it as they do, talk with them, be in communication with them. But for them, as I mentioned earlier, you know, quality of life in a community is as important and sometimes more important than a job. They know that they're going to have 5, 6, 7, 8 jobs. I mean, you've had 2 completely different journalism and now academia. So, you know, that will just be on steroids for the next generation as the gig economy continues to become more important. So they're really looking for a place that matches their values. They might have 6 or 7 jobs here, but they don't want to have to move to a different city every single time. So when they're looking at Greater Green Bay or they're looking at the New North, they want to know, like, is this a place that matches my values? So is it a place where I can meet other people like me, which is why Current is so important here, the Young Professionals Association. They want to know, you know, are there plenty of things to do after hours? So can I park my car once and walk down Main Street and have a bite to eat and meet some friends and maybe smoke a cigar at a cigar bar? I mean, I don't know, whatever their thing is. And they also are looking for parks and trails and recreation areas, because our next generation of knowledge workers, they do this a lot. They sit on their butts, they process information, they have meetings. So when they get out of work at 5, man, they're like, I gotta stretch my legs, I wanna get on my bike, I wanna play some ultimate frisbee. So what is the infrastructure for that in our community?
So let me ask you questions very specific to our greater Green Bay area.
Yep.
We have this wonderful, wonderful resource in the Green Bay Packers. It means that Green Bay is a brand that's literally known all around the world. But linked to that is this notion of the frozen tundra and the cheese, the beer, the party time. So so to what extent is this brand, such as it is, a positive for us, and to what extent is it a problem for us to sort of project the real Green Bay beyond the the wrong-headed stereotype? How do you reconcile those two things?
I think it's with a lot of things. There's the media's perceived image, and then there is, like you say, the real Green Bay. I love that. One of the things that I saw on the video that was produced to talk about all the things that make this a great place, there was a woman who said, "We are the warmest place on earth." And I think that, number one, it acknowledges the frozen tundra, and it cuts right through it to that human and humane connection. And I think that, to me, I mean, if there was one takeaway about what could your line be, that the notion of the warmest place on earth is a beautiful one-liner. Yeah.
In your research, just when a community is in a northern climate, whether it's Green Bay or whether it's Syracuse, New York, or whether it's the Twin Cities, is that an additional barrier that has to be overcome for recruiting that doesn't exist if you're, Austin or Orlando, Florida? Or do they have the flip? I mean, it's so warm in some of those places that, I mean, what does your research or, your gut tell you about, that kind of a thing?
I don't have the research to back this up, but what I am sure of is that, number one, people generally, if they're going to leave and then come back, they're going to come back to a place that feels like home. So to the extent that we Northerners can continue to make babies, we will do okay over the long haul. But the other thing that I have to say, and air conditioning, I think I wrote a blog once that said, like, air conditioning did more for talent attraction than anything else, because those hot climates became livable. So do we need giant heating, outdoor heating furnaces everywhere? I don't know. But the one thing I will say is, if the science is right and if the climate will continue to be warmer, I think the new research is showing that by 2051, the coldest day in most of our cities will be warmer by like 20 degrees than the coldest day a generation ago. I mean, we're warming more rapidly. Right. So what that means is we are becoming the Sun Belt for Canada.
Right, Green Bay Riviera.
That's right. You got it, baby.
I like it. So buy real estate.
Get in now.
You know this area very well, and you also have studied it, and you studied it in part for your presentation today, and you talked a little bit about some of the key factors in terms of being attractive to young people that you think Green Bay looks good. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you feel like we're doing well that way?
Absolutely. So commitment to public education is the first one. The second one is the economic diversity in this region. You've got small businesses, mid-sized businesses, you have some enormous businesses, global businesses. The question I had was about the entrepreneurial friendliness. So you've got a lot of things that next generation really values. And let's not forget, 80% of all Americans want to live near the water, and you own a bay. So that's good.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Once they're here, once you've recruited the talent, what keeps the talent? I mean, and again, I think we're generally talking about these young singles. They start having families and children, they're putting down roots, and it makes it a little easier. But once we get the young professionals, the people that are in current and the like, what keeps them satisfied? What keeps them tethered to us? I
love that you just use the word tether, because that is the question. When young, we know, for example, those of us who recruit people into our businesses, we know that we need buddy systems to make sure that they feel connected to somebody, that they have somebody to ask questions of, they go through orientation. We don't do anything at a community level. You move into Green Bay and it's like, good luck! So how do we help connect tether. Feels a little more forceful, but how can we make some sticky points for these young professionals? You know, every young professional should know about current. Every young professional should, you know, maybe, and one of the things that organizations like Current do in other communities is they have a newcomers club, you know, a welcome club, so that you can meet other people who are new to here too, and have a few other people who've been here a little bit longer, and be able to share, like, yeah, this is the church that a lot of young families go to, and you know, make sure you get to the farmers market on Wednesday afternoons and so forth. So we just need to create more of those sticky points for young professionals, because they make their assessment of community within 90 to 180 days. Within 3 to 6 months, they know if they're going to stick it out, if it feels like home.
Yeah. You write in your book, when you're talking about economic development, there's sort of the classic notion of economic development where we're going to go out and recruit big companies to come in. But you talked about, I think, Littleton, Colorado, where some decades ago they eschewed that for the notion that you call economic gardening, which focuses more on cultivating the businesses you already have. Can you talk about what that entails and why that's important?
Yep. So economic gardening was this concept, as you mentioned, developed in Littleton, Colorado. And what they realized, what the city economic development director realized, was that you know, there are, like, I think 3,000 economic development organizations, and they're all trying to attract the same companies, you know, the same 50 big deals that get done every year. It's a difficult game. So instead, they looked internally and they said, okay, how can we help a company with 20 jobs grow to 40 jobs, you know, or whatever the case is? And they also said, although all small businesses are important, some are more important than others to the economy. And I think that's a very brave thing to do. You know, we like to be very populous in how we deliver services in communities, but Littleton didn't do that. They said, we're going to go after what they called the gazelles, the really fast-running companies that usually have a very visionary founder, have got amazing market fundamentals, and you know, there really is the will and the appetite to grow. So you get a little bit of a weirdo at the top, like a Steve Jobs, an amazing market opportunity, and people who are willing to work their faces off. So when you think about the Green Bay area, probably a few of these companies come to mind right now. So what Littleton did is, instead of trying to spread the peanut butter over all the slices of white bread, they said, we're going to focus the peanut butter on these gazelles, and we are going to create an ecosystem where they can thrive, and their results have been amazing.
I think part of the thread through what you've talked about today and in your book is just this notion that for us to really prosper, to see the arrival of the next spring, this boomer generation that I'm certainly you know, a part of, really has to step up, acknowledge that, you know, we can't be selfish about this, and we certainly can't burden the next generation and the next generation. Do you think the boomer generation will step up and do the right thing?
I do. I'm already seeing it. I'm already seeing it. And what's interesting is some of the longest running civilizations, there is a clear demarcation when elders stop being doers and become guiders, you know, and in our society, we're a young society. We haven't yet figured out how to do that gracefully. You retire, you feel like you no longer exist, and then you get institutionalized. And maybe you go to Sun City, somewhere between point A and point B. So we as a society have done a very poor job of figuring out that elder piece. But I believe that the boomers are going to do it, because what often happens in that sort of hero's journey is you go off, you have your experiences, and you come back to center. And the boomers are, we cannot forget, the boomers are the generation that fought for women's rights, that fought for civil rights, to the extent that we can get them circled back around to those core issues and get them to line up their Rolodexes and their mentoring abilities and give them a valued place in our society, not institutionalize them, not pretend that if you're not working in a real job you don't exist anymore. They will absolutely help America in a powerful way through regeneration. It's
been a real treat having you here at St. Norbert College and
Thanks,
on Conversations
Tom.
with St. Norbert. And God willing, a lot of the things that you're talking about will happen, and we will do right by the next generation.
Let's revisit this in 2020 and see if what we talked about on air today happened.
You have a standing invitation.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, I want to thank Rebecca Ryan for being our guest today, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Until next time, I'm St. Norbert College President Tom Kunkel, sitting in for the still charming Kevin Quinn. Best wishes for good conversations from St. Norbert College.